You're listening to the Maryland Crabs podcast with John Frenay and my dad, Tim Hamilton. Okay, there, I did it. Give me my phone back.
Live from a grungy kitchen table located in Annapolis, Maryland's scenic and historic capital, it's the Maryland Crabs podcast. With each episode, your hosts, Tim Hamilton, John Frenay, and the occasional guest will dive in and pick apart the stuff that really matters most to you. We're too lazy to actually solve any of these problems, but we can definitely stir the pot. From schools, politics, parking in the fire lane, to those horrible people who drive BMWs. And here with this week's episode, live from the kitchen table, Tim Hamilton and John Frenay.
Hey, welcome to the Maryland Crabs podcast. This is John Frenay and Tim Hamilton. If you need to follow us, if you don't already know, follow us on Twitter at MD Crabs Podcast. Our website is themarylandcrabs.com. Our email is info@themarylandcrabs.com. And you can also check us out on Facebook. We've got a page and a group. And we are on a road trip again.
Yep, you took me out of my 2-mile radius that I usually hang around.
That's right. We are over here in Rockville, and they said not to come back here, but we're back here anyway.
I see what you did.
Yeah, it's the whole REM thing there. But we are going to be talking with Larry Bradshaw, who is the CEO of the National Lutheran Communities and Services, which is the developer now of the village at Providence Point, which used to be called the dreaded Crystal Spring. And it's a very interesting project. There's some challenges that are going to go on, and we're going to find out a little bit about the project, where it came from, what NLCS is, and how it's going to help out Annapolis and our senior community. How are you today, Mr. Bradshaw?
I'm doing well. Thanks for coming over to Rockville.
Thank you. Yeah, it was good. My directions were fine. Tim's were a little bit late. He showed up about 10 minutes late. And
I thought this was like 2 blocks from where I grew up, and I just read the street name wrong. So I was smugly...
It's grown. It's grown since you grew up here.
You know what? And actually, that's an interesting point that parlays it into. That was one of the fears that a lot of people in Annapolis had, is that the people who live in Annapolis, a lot of them have been there for generations, and they're fearful of any change. And someone who grew up in this area, and where we are right now was when I was a kid, which wasn't that long ago. You packed a lunch to come out here because this was the boonies, and now it's part of the inner suburbs, So I look around literally now, and half the stuff didn't exist when I was a kid. So I think that's a lot of the fear that people have in Annapolis, and why developers become such a dirty word. And if it gives you any cold comfort, we've had talks with other developers who have projects that are pending, and people are apoplectic about it too. So I kind of understand where people are coming from. They don't want to see the changes. But on the other hand, my mom grew up here since the 1950s, and it's been a slow change for her that she's gotten used to over time.
Well, nobody likes change, period. I mean, what's the old adage? This is only babies and something else are the only people that like change.
That's a great quote.
It's true. Well, it'd be better if I knew what it was.
That was my point.
But Larry, let's talk a little bit about NLCS. This all of a sudden came into news in Annapolis as, okay, Crystal Spring is dead. NLCS is the new developer, the big bad developer that's coming in, that's taking this over from Hill Point Partners, which was the firm out of Connecticut. There was the question when you were first coming as part of the Crystal Spring project that it was tax exempt because it's a church organization, everything else. So explain a little bit about what is NLCS? It's National Lutheran Communities and Services.
Yeah, National Lutheran Communities and Services, and we haven't been called the big bad developer before, so that's
well, not to your face.
welcome to Annapolis.
Welcome to Annapolis. But
we got to bring some news to you.
National Lutheran Communities and Services is a 126-year-old organization. We are not for profit. We started in Northeast D.C. back in 1890. If I get my dates right, 1890. Moved to Rockville in the late 70s, 1970, when the district, I don't know if they condemned the property or they encouraged the National Lutheran Home at that time, too, that they wanted to do something with the property that wasn't really conducive to the National Lutheran Home. So National Lutheran Home at that point moved to Rockville.
From Northeast?
That was a good Northeast.
Move. That was a good move.
From Northeast. Yeah. As a matter of fact, we just had our 125th anniversary, and we went back to the original site just a couple years ago and had a great time. The property looks apparently like it did back then.
What is there now?
Senior housing.
Okay.
A lot of it run by the district.
Okay.
And so we felt it was to complete the circle, we would go there for our 125th anniversary, and it was well done. Yeah, it was well done. So we moved to Rockville in late 70s, early 80s. We're just about 2.5 miles from where we're sitting today. And that community, at the point when it was in Northeast DC, was primarily a nursing home. And I think it's important to distinguish a little bit about what is a nursing home and what is an assisted living and what is a continuing care retirement community. We, right now, are a continuing care retirement community in Rockville. We have independent living where individuals come in as they are going into a transition in their life. I sometimes refer to it as a lifestyle transition.
Okay, so this could be an empty nester, on the upper, obviously an empty nester, somebody that's older. I mean,
empty nester, and a lot of people think because a lot of our literature talks about individuals 60 or 62 and older. You see that at other communities. The average age of people moving into new communities is somewhere between 76 and 82. Okay. So it is not a young population that is moving into these communities.
And the oldest baby boomer right now would be 72.
Yeah,
that's about 79 or 81 million. I can't remember what it is. So that is going about to explode when you talk about the. Yeah,
they call that the silver tsunami.
Yeah, it's going to be massive.
It's massive, and I think if you look at some of the statistics, only about 6%, and this may be a little old statistic, but about 6% of individuals who are over the age of 70 live in some kind of community or institutional housing. Almost 94% are staying at home, and everybody that we talk to, you talk to most seniors or most older adults, they want to stay at home. They want to stay where they lived. I mean, my parents went through that, and they always wanted to stay where they had grown up. But I think people who make this choice to come to as the village of Rockville, that we have here, are coming as a lifestyle change. They're downsizing. Maybe their kids are all grown. They have younger grandchildren, but they don't want the challenges of living at home and the uncertainty. When my mother moved from her home and she was living by herself, she was a little bit fragile. I finally convinced her by saying, you need to take the uncertainty out of your life. And the uncertainty of having a house that she'd lived in for 45 years was what happens when the furnace goes out? What happens when the snow falls? She lives in Kansas, and there's pretty significant snowfalls out there. So that became, that whole transition wasn't because necessarily of her health, but because of the uncertainty of both social aspects, but also financial aspects. So we moved to Rockville in 1979, 1980, and then in 2008 the organization wanted to grow because we are not-for-profit, as I said. We are a social ministry of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. There are 3 synods within this area. One is the Virginia Synod, Washington Metropolitan D.C. Synod, and Delaware, Maryland. So each one of those synods name 5 of our board members. So we had a presence in the Metro D.C. Synod with Rockville. We recently...
what is that? Is it to the Irish Catholic here? Is that like a diocese? Or is that...
Yes, very similar.
Okay.
Very similar. And the Metropolitan D.C. Synod is in D.C., but also talks to the adjacent counties in Virginia and Maryland. So Prince George's County, Montgomery County, and Maryland are part of that synod. So Rockville is in that synod. The Virginia Synod had always wanted National Lutheran to have a presence in Virginia. So in 2008, the organization created a parent organization, if you will, National Lutheran Home for the Aged at that time. And subsequent to that, we have developed the property in Winchester, Virginia, and also have acquired a moderate senior rental unit in Stanton, Virginia. So we have a presence in Virginia. We have a presence in the district, but we don't have a presence in Delaware, Maryland. Maryland is a tough state to develop in.
Okay.
From a continuing care retirement community, the Department of Aging does a really good job of advocating for seniors, and it's a rather arduous process. But
and you're in the process of that now with the village.
We are.
Okay.
Wait, let's take a step back. You said that Maryland's a difficult state in which to develop. Why is that specific?
It's very highly regulated from a senior living standpoint, much more so than Virginia.
And can you give a couple examples? In which way?
The Department on Aging is much more hands-on, for lack of a better way to put it. They have a very defined process what you need to do. You file a letter of intent. After that letter of intent, you file a financial feasibility application, for lack of a better way to do it, which includes a market study, an actuarial study, a financial study. And basically, it is intended to assure that any seniors or residents who are going to sign up for this community, the community has been well vetted from a viability standpoint.
Where does that stand? Do you know on a national level, as far as is Maryland considered one of the more difficult states as far as that?
I don't want to use the word difficult. I would want to say
or more thorough.
More thorough. That's a better way to do it. North Carolina is very very thorough.
That's surprising. They don't even pave roads there.
Not to get the politics in North Carolina, we just
they don't listen to us. Who cares?
They're very thorough.
What are they going to do? They can't drive here. They don't have paved roads.
They are very thorough. Florida is very progressive as far as their Bureau of Insurance. Those are the three. California is pretty again, challenging is not the right word, thorough. But those four states. Ohio has a good presence, but those four states are the ones that really stick out for me, being in the industry for 35 years. But Maryland is very thorough with their deal. So, in looking at Maryland, several years ago, John Erickson came up and basically said he was going to build mega continuing care retirement communities every 30 miles from Boston to Richmond. And living at that time in Gaithersburg, I was working for another community in Gaithersburg. We were right in the middle of that kind of whole process,
right.
and we were all worried. But so what that has done, though, it has really created, especially in the Baltimore area, northern Montgomery County areas, a very high density as far as the number of senior living communities within a competitive environment. Almost not to get into the geeky statistics, but a penetration rates in the excess of 25 to 30%, which are really unheard of throughout the other parts of the country.
What does that mean?
It really means that for all of the, say, 75 and older population in any one primary market area, about 25 to 30% of those individuals are living in communities.
Oh, within the demographic.
Within the demographics.
Gotcha. And you said originally it was like 9%?
Nationally, it's about 6%.
6%.
So
when I was growing up, it was what, Leisure World. That was the only.
Yeah,
that was the big monster out there in North Rockville or wherever that was.
So one of our strategies at National Lutheran really was to have a presence in all three of our senates. Virginia, we now have a presence. We have a presence in Washington, but we don't have a presence in Maryland. So that was kind of a strategic goal that I presented to the board early on when I got here in 2010. You look at the Baltimore area, it's pretty saturated. Northern Montgomery County is pretty saturated. You go to the Panhandle or Western Maryland, it is... the demographics aren't there.
There's like 20 people who live there.
Yeah. There's not a whole lot there. No. So, Southern Maryland, I've developed a project in Solomons, right on the water. On the water when I was with Asbury several years ago. So, this project was brought to us from Affirmative Hills Point. There was a previous senior living community that backed out of it. In Sykesville, Maryland, several years ago. Episcopal Ministries was involved at some point. They went through some changes in leadership and decided that they were going to focus in a different area. So this project was brought to us, and it was in a demographic that is very positive. I mean, if you look at the demographics in Annapolis and in the primary market area, it's a very, very... needy is not the right word, but there's a lot of seniors in that area.
Oh, without a doubt.
Relative to competition. In Ginger Cove and Bay Woods, I think they do a great job. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, they're full. I think those are very different contract models. Bay Woods is an equity-based model, which is very different than Ginger Cove. And Ginger Cove, depending on the unit, I think you're looking at specifically at Ginger Cove, you could get a very short waiting list, or you could get a very long wait.
So, I mean, on Ginger Cove, and you said an equity model, just for those that aren't aware, that is essentially where you write a check for $500,000, and then you pay a monthly fee for whatever unit you're in.
Correct.
And then when you pass on a percentage of that, it could be, I guess it depends on the life cycle of the community, could be 70, 80, 90% of your equity or whatever deal is struck is returned to your estate.
Yes. Baywoods is even a little bit different. I think Baywoods actually is a fee simple model. In other words, I think title actually changes into the units at Baywoods.
Okay.
Again, I don't want to get into other people's business model, but I understand Ginger Cove, there is not a transfer of title, but they do pay an upfront fee there, and then a monthly fee, as you just described.
And it's essentially, my mother was in a similar community like that in Florida, and essentially it's an interest-free construction loan to them, or an operational loan to be able to expand services, or to. I know when she moved in, they didn't have an Alzheimer's care, and as Alzheimer's became, my mom developed it. Then when she was able to, when she got older, she slid into the Alzheimer's unit where she had the care that she needed throughout her life. And NLCS, I mean, you're not. Lutheran's in there, but this is not, you don't need to be a Lutheran to be here.
Correct. No, I think if you look at our communities, the Lutherans would be in the minority, for sure. But no, there's no requirement to be any kind of Lutheran, Catholic, Irish, to you, Tim, Irish Catholic there.
I'm not a good one.
I'll leave that alone.
My mom doesn't listen either. So.
But, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Methodists, we do have also some Jewish individuals in Rockville, especially in our short-term rehab facility. So it's a very wide spectrum of faiths, beliefs, etc. When you talk about an entrance fee, I look at it as really an opportunity to assure yourself where you're going to, should you choose, where you're going to live the rest of your life. Because they're called entrance fees, or called life fees, whatever you want to call it. The bottom line is, to your point, is you come in. I think you said this before we started the podcast, that your mom had gone in, she paid a fee, and she knew that she was going to live there for the rest of her life. Right. That's really the magic, if you will. This once you write that check, and it can. I'm not saying it's cheap. I'm just saying it's a pretty hefty check. But the bottom line is, in our 126 years, we've never asked anybody to leave because they couldn't pay. So part of that, what that part of that entrance fee does, is really assure that we have the capabilities long term to be viable and to have a place for individuals to live.
So then you're putting out, for lack of a better word, scholarships or some sort of financial aid to issues that may change. Somebody may end up, losing a ton of money in the stock market, a lot of their investments or something like that, and be unable to afford it. They're not going to be put out onto the street.
Well, I think that's a fair way to characterize it. I will share. We do have in our contract, we have some financial preservation issues that, if someone invests in the stock market, that's not going to kick any issues. I can tell you, over my career, we've had one individual, only one in 37 years, who I've always worked in not-for-profit, so only one in 37 years who basically, and it didn't happen here, was asked to leave because they had run out of resources. And it was only because they decided that going to Atlantic City and Vegas were really tempting things. And they
wait, it might be a way to get
They basically, squandered all their assets. And then when they came back looking for benevolent care and Medicaid, of course.
You say squander, I say sucking the marrow out of life. It's just a little bit, we're down to logistics here.
Yeah. And so that's the only time that I've ever seen anything like that happen in this industry. So
now, how many communities do you have?
We have three.
Three communities.
One in Rockville, one in Stanton, Virginia, one in Winchester.
Okay, and they're all the same model.
A little different. I think Rockville is much more clinical model. When I first came here, it was a 300-bed nursing home. Those have become a little bit obsolete. You go back 30 years, people were spending 3, 4, and 5 years in skilled nursing care. The people who were spending time in skilled nursing care then probably would be still independent living now.
Sure.
Because the whole acuity model has shifted. Assisted living, 30 years ago really wasn't a viable option, but now that's in there.
Well, you've got a group of seniors, for lack of a better word, that are growing older now, that they're not willing to give up their activities. And, whether it's healthcare is keeping them healthier or mindset or whatever it is, maybe
family members,
opportunity, certainly money to be able to do it. I think it's a great thing. And I think it's important to distinguish that this is not a nursing home that we're looking at. This is and transitional housing sounds really horrible.
I don't know.
It sounds like you're just getting out of jail, but
so my kids had a piano recital a couple weeks ago, and they had it up at the Sunrise in Severna Park. And I remember we Christmas Carol when we were kids down in Bethesda off Grosvenor Lane at this nursing home, and it was like the linoleum floors, and it was awful. I remember dreading to go, but we went to this thing a couple weeks ago, and it was like being on a cruise ship. Yeah. The place looked spectacular. They had grand pianos. They had everyone had like each door looked like an apartment, like when people were going in.
Well, Sunrise, I believe, is assisted living.
Yes,
Sunrise to continuing care.
Sunrise is assisted living. They do have some rental units. I think if you look at Sunrise Severna Park, I think has some rental units in the independent living. But for the most part, Sunrise came out of the assisted living arena.
And continuing care, which is what the Villages of Providence Point is. This is independent living. This is for lack of a better word, a condo, a townhome, perhaps an individual home. Not necessarily here, but some communities would have it where you're just moving into a neighborhood. You've got your car, you've got your own kitchen, you go grocery shop, you go out to dinner, and you just interact with your neighbors just like you would in a normal neighborhood. When the time comes, if the time comes, you fall down and you break a hip or break a leg or something like that, there is medical care available in a more of a traditional nursing home type of an environment. And will there be a memory, Alzheimer type?
Those are great points, and I want to expand on them. This will be a very different looking model than I think what many people are experiencing. For instance, it all goes back to the unit mix. And when we built our community in Winchester, Virginia, back in 2013, we built a very, very small skilled nursing unit, primarily because skilled nursing is just not the place anybody wants to be.
Sure, that's probably the smallest part of the business.
And so in Maryland, especially if you go back to, because Maryland is a certificate of need state, you would need to get a certificate of need for new skilled nursing beds. You can't get that in the state of Maryland because there is no quote-unquote need as defined by the state. So in order to get any skilled nursing beds in a community like the Village of Providence Point, you go under an exemption that is available to CCRCs, or continuing care retirement communities. I shouldn't use the acronyms here. So what we are going to do is we're going to build a very small nursing home with Providence Point, much smaller than you would have built 15 years ago, to the point when we developed the Solomons facility in southern Maryland, we had about a 40-bed skilled nursing facility. And I will tell you, it probably took 10 years to ever get to any kind of capacity, and we finally were able to bring people from the outside. But in the state of Maryland, so we build this community. If we built a huge skilled nursing facility, we could not get people to come into it because people cannot, because of the laws, they cannot come from the outside. Gotcha. So we're going to build a smaller skilled nursing that will probably be in the neighborhood of around 20 beds, very, very small, that will be there purposefully to serve the residents who live there. So to your point, they come in independent living, or residential living, whatever you want to call that. They pay a fee. And that fee gives them access to the rest of the community for the rest of their lives. So if they were to break a hip or decide on elective knee surgery replacement, they go to the hospital, they do their surgery, then they would come back to our rehab-specific facility.
And hang out there for a couple of weeks.
Go back home, and we're hoping that we would also have home health and home care there. So that transition would go from hospital back to the skilled nursing facility, back to their unit, and then we would follow them with in-home care to assist them in further rehabbing.
And then
so they get back
pull the in-home care out and let them go on their own.
before they go back. A totally different model than it would have been several years ago.
Well, it's interesting. I'll tell you what. I'm going to see if we can take a break right here. I want to see if I can wander around this expanse and find the men's room. But when we get back, let's talk a little bit about how NLCS got here, and what was your role then? What were changes that you're proposing now? Because it's not going to be this gigantic Crystal Springs project that everybody went and choked on before. And it's exciting to see where it's gone, what changes you have incorporated, the constructive changes that you've listened to. And when we get back, we will talk about that.
Spring is waiting outside your door, and it's time to make your lawn and garden beautiful again with Homestead Gardens. Their experts will show you how to make a safe lawn for kids and pets using the area's largest selection of organic lawn solutions. Share family fun and satisfaction growing food, flowers, and shrubs together. Visit Homestead Gardens in Davidsonville or Severna Park, Maryland, and go to homesteadgardens.com for deals, events, and workshops. Live life outdoors this season with Homestead Gardens.
And we're back here with the Maryland Crabs. We're in Rockville with Larry Bradshaw, who is the president and CEO of the National Lutheran Communities and Services, which is, we don't want to use the word developer, but the people behind the project of the village at Providence Point, which is the, not resurrected, but Crystal Springs, formerly known as.
Evolution
of. And, we learned a little bit about what NLCS was and the concepts and everything else, but how did you get here? I mean, you were initially... Well, let me back up a little bit. Crystal Spring, a lot of people seem to forget that Crystal Spring Farm at one point was combined with Mosk Farm, and there were Christmas trees, and it was owned by Janet and David Richardson. It went down to the water and everything else. It was just a beautiful thing. They built the barn, and they've got the
wellness houses up there. Which is a wonderful community event. And as Mrs. Richardson is getting older, she's looking to divest, I guess, her assets and looking to sell off part of that. And it was initially approved for something close to 700 townhomes way back when. And this was before it was annexed into the city. I believe the county approved that. And then it was annexed into the city. She submitted a thing with 25 farmettes or junior little things on this property. Yeah, each was like 4 or 5 acres.
Right, which wasn't, I wouldn't call it a farmette, but, small, but they're not McMansions by any means. Then it morphed into a large Crystal Spring community, which included a hotel, an amphitheater, shopping,
an inn,
retirement community, spa,
Howard Harris Teeter,
Cultural Arts Center was involved in it.
Everything else there. There was going to be a Hooters there, and
that one I don't recall. But
I just threw that right in there. Hey, work with me on this. And there was a ton of opposition on that, and admittedly, it was a aggressive project.
Well, I think there was a letter to the editor. There's always letters to the editor about Crystal Spring, and I wrote a comment after that when I used to write comments on the back of that, and it was just, I like to think it's rather, I had some issues with the project when it came to traffic and it came to schools. The environmental part, I think, was kind of a red herring for a lot of reasons, but so I wrote something to that extent. So I got a call from someone who's no longer with the group, who's an attorney, and he said, hey, can we sit down and talk about this over coffee? I said, yeah. So I did, and that didn't go well. But he admitted, I said, I said to him, you have to realize, because he was kind of lecturing me at the time, going, well, traffic will solve itself in 10 years. And I said, look, you got to understand the optics of this, is that we're talking about a huge development that's been scaled down, but a lot of people, you came in and scared a lot of people. And he said, yeah, maybe the original presentation was not the best optics, where we came in with the picture of this massive sort of development, which has since been scaled back. And he kind of said that was probably a mistake. We should have come in sideways and to alleviate the problem. And that's what I would say with John, that the vast majority of people who live in the area don't understand the project, don't even think about it a whole lot until it starts construction, until issues, if they were to occur, would occur. But the smaller groups, there's a small group of people who are opposed to it, and an even smaller group who are very vocal, because they tend to be the environmentalists who don't want to see any development whatsoever. But so the opposition right now is vague in general, I think, for the most part, except for the environmental. And they've been kind of quiet lately.
Well, it does. And NLCS was involved in this initially.
But not initially. Several times.
Somebody come back. But the most current iteration of the massive Crystal Spring. You guys were tasked with developing the continuing care component of that. And that was whittled down and shifted, and we moved the independent living cottages from here to there and everything else north of the stream, west of the street and everything else. And finally, Hill Point, they sort of threw in the towel and said that we can't do it, or maybe they were fired by Janet. I don't know how that all transpired. But now the project is just a continuing care community, and to be owned, managed, and built by you, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, as I said earlier, we've been in business for 126 years. This is not a development, build and flip it proposition. This is a long-term partnership between NLCS and the city of Annapolis.
So you're going to be a neighbor.
Yes.
For 100 and X years, just like you are in Rockville.
Correct.
And since the place in Northern Virginia, which was, early 2000s?
2013.
Okay, 2013.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're looking to be a neighbor, not necessarily a doze and dash kind of a...
But I think this is where it's interesting. So we met with a developer of a project in Eastport a couple weeks ago, and he taught us, and taught me especially, the difference between development and infill development, which is basically taking, especially in Bethesda and Rockville, where you're taking areas and buildings that have been around for 50, 60 years and outlived their usefulness, and then you replace them. And that is a lot easier for most people to accept than something like this, which is new development. And that's what's scary for people. So you're facing a lot of challenges that maybe what the developer we talked to was talking about infill development, and he's getting a vocal minority that's kind of pushing back against him. But, I mean, for you guys coming in, the optics of it, and especially before, where they're saying, okay, you're coming in, you're bulldozing all the trees, and it's right up against the South River. But there's been a huge scale back since then. So what's the difference between what was originally proposed and what's proposed now?
Well, I think if you go way back to the very first part that we were there in 2011, and you looked at you looked at a graphic.
Sure, which I'm looking at now. Actually.
Yeah, you would see along Forest Drive, you would see the massive retail development.
Do you know like every inch of this property by now?
An awful lot of it. I know a lot more about the intricacies of this project than I probably really ever wanted to know. But
I've lived here for 20 years. I'm looking at this map going, I didn't know that was there.
There's a. I mean, but if you looked from the very beginning, the retail and the inn and spa and all that would have been massed along Forest Drive from around the spa drive. It's the Spa Road intersection over to Newtown 20. And then below that would have been the townhouses and some of the other kind of
non-age restricted.
Non-age restricted. And then the continuing care retirement community, or our piece, was clear to the southern part of the property. Below the intermittent stream.
Back by the water.
Back by the water, back by the meadow. And that was where we started. Which is, if you look at the footprint now, we're looking at our land footprint is about 47 acres or 49 acres on what we're purchasing, of which we're looking at developing about 27 acres. So the acreage is much smaller. I think the original footprint back in 2011 of just the continuing care community was almost 55 acres. If you look at a picture...
The total acreage of the plot of Crystal Spring Farm is, what, 125?
I believe the annexation, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong. We're about 110. No.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes
somewhere
it. That's
there.
what I thought. It was upward of 100.
Yeah, 100. Well, 110 of the site where the development was considered, but then another 75 acres plus, which would have included some of the equestrian farm,
right in the wellness house
farm. So I think the annexation agreement was closer to about 190 acres, if I recall, in round terms.
Right.
And then Mrs. Pearson had agreed in that annexation agreement to put it 75 acres of perpetual conservation into an easement, which I've heard people say, well, is she going to do that? And I've never heard her once back away from that commitment. But if you look at the annexation agreement, she's not required to do that until there is an approved development plan by the city.
Okay.
So
it's coming. It's just not coming until we're developed.
So to give some people some perspective, what I'm looking at here, which makes for great podcasting,
and we'll put this up on the episode.
Yeah, we'll have in the show notes. You just click on this. But I'm looking at it's where Spa Road meets Forest Drive, and at that corner, that's where almost everything is located. Down, and it goes down along Spa Road to right behind the Wellness House, where the Christmas tree farm was, and that's where pretty much everything is. So I'm looking at about, from what I can see, it's about a quarter of the property. And everything is right there at the intersection for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And part of that right now currently is occupied by a 3-story
that includes
ugly white building and the old offices of Chesapeake Life magazine, that yellow house that sits up on the hill.
Oh, wait, that's part of this?
Yes.
That's all.
I didn't know
that's
that.
all right in here in this section.
That is part of the land that we have under control at this point. Is the
Gotcha.
3-story building and the house.
Yeah.
That's up on the hill.
Correct.
So a good, not I don't want to say a good portion, but a decent amount of the portion of the land that you're looking to develop is indeed already developed to a degree with the building.
Yeah, I think if I break down the numbers, it's probably that white office building and the building you refer to are on about 5 or 6 acres, roughly.
Okay.
So there's 2 tracts of land. One that is about a 10-acre piece, which looks like a pizza pie to me.
Right.
I love pizza.
I love pizza too. That's what reminds me of that.
Nothing wrong with pizza.
And then the other roughly 39 acres is the land that we're purchasing from Mrs. Pearson. That is, as you just is adjacent to the equestrian farm and the wellness house and Spa Road and Forest Drive.
And the total number of units we're talking about now, I mean, it's not the 190,000 that everyone seems to think it was. Before.
No. Interestingly enough, I've learned a lot about this project, and just not to go back, but you did talk about
go back.
700 roughly single-family homes that were prior to the annexation, which I think Mrs. Pearson, I think she saved the city of a little bit from having that built. And then the farmettes, I've learned about, and I've heard a lot of that from the opposition. And what I've also learned from the farmettes were that was actually looked at by the city, and it was, from what I have learned, is that because you're going to have space for livestock and other things, it probably would have taken down more trees than maybe we're taking down.
Interesting.
I mean, I've heard that anecdotally. I don't have the statistics on that.
Right, yeah, so you're not just putting a little house and everything else remaining the way it is. Yeah,
because you've got to have land cleared for the livestock to graze and other such things. So again, that was a little bit more before my time. But just to do a compare and contrast, previously the original concept back in 2011 would have basically taken, there's about 60, there's probably 100 plus acres that do not include the farm and other such things. If you look at the original concept of that 100 acres, I bet you were building on 80 to 85 acres on that piece of property. So everything that was below the intermittent stream has been moved forward. Basically, the entire roughly 61 acres that are adjacent to Newtown 20 there's no plans to build anything there, as far as I know.
And that's one of the things that everyone's squawking about, that right now there is no plans, but there's nothing that says that Mrs. Richardson can't go and try to get a development on that down the road. And that's true, and that's true. That's not your problem.
Right.
To be honest with you. And to be honest,
where? So, but
over in here. As I point on,
is everyone following that?
This would be the area. There's a small road, looks like a driveway that runs back to the water, and there's a beat up old shack that's right adjacent to it. So to the right of that, heading up towards CVS, up Forest Drive on CVS and Newtown 20, that area will still remain undeveloped at this point.
Gotcha.
And to be honest with you, I think moving the continuing care community away from some of the crime and the issues that are in public housing, because there's, and the CVS and whatnot has some issues with crime, I think that's probably a little bit more of a secure thing. The project itself, I mean, I'm looking at all the model on the aerial thing. You've got a big, large, sort of looks like a big H in the middle, and that's, I'm assuming that's the main building, which will house a restaurant, dining room?
The main building will include phases 1 and 2 are going to approximate about 310 units in round terms, 310, 320 units. But included in that will be all of the common space. It will include multiple dining venues. It will have a chapel. One of the things we do is a chapel, and Tim, you mentioned earlier about going to a concert. Our community in Winchester, the chapel is a multi-purpose room, but it's also been put together so Shenandoah University can use it as a concert venue, and that's been very, very appealing to a lot of the residents of Winchester. And we expect a lot of community-based projects in this project also. So the interesting part about how this project has evolved, where we were and where we have gone, is as we began to redevelop it, and as it began to become clear that you were just not going to get this massive development for a lot of reasons. When we started redoing this project back a year ago, April now, when we had conversations with the city about going through this process, we kind of took the roadmap from several documentations and conversations we've had with members of the opposition saying, what are you opposed to? And I know we've had direct one-to-one conversations with leaders of the opposition a couple years ago who said, if we're just talking about the CCRC, and if you move everything closer to Forest Drive, north of the intermittent stream, we're good.
So just to clarify, though, so the opposition, this is where it gets muddy, is that if you had the levels of people who oppose the project, and there's also levels of opposition as far as how much they do. You have people who, if you ask them saying, well, how do you feel about Crystal Spring? Like, I'm not, no, I guess not. I think when you're talking the opposition, you're talking about
more vocal.
You're talking about the environmental. I mean, that's, and we can put like Gerald Weingrad and Dave Proston, I think, to some extent.
Dave Proston, and I'm
saying this just because they've been vocal, and so I'm not calling anyone out. But so when you're saying the opposition, you're talking probably most likely about the environmental opposition.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, again, going back to our roadmap, the Sierra Club, I think on Sierra Club letterhead, wrote a letter back in 2013 to Mayor Cohen at the time. And
you had made a separate piece with the South River Federation.
Yes.
That was
okay. And so the letter from Sierra Club, basically, you can go through the letter and says, if we're talking about moving everything north of closer to Forest Drive, and they use the terms, they pointed back to the comprehensive plan about a more dense community closer to Forest Drive, and then more single buildings, et cetera, as you move south. That was the kind of roadmap we took. And if you look at that letter from the Sierra Club, and you overlay to what we're proposing now, I think you would find that we would meet
pretty much in line with it.
Pretty much everything in line with that.
So everything's fine then, right?
Well,
welcome to Annapolis, my friend.
So the rules have changed.
Yeah. Well, we also had 2 public meetings in March on a Thursday evening.
Right. And they were pretty well. They were well attended.
We had about 35 or 40 people the first night, and somewhere maybe 25 to 30 second. The first one was. It was difficult.
Ruckus?
It was difficult. I mean, I started my presentation, and almost the spears came flying at us very quickly.
Hi, my name's Larry. No, you're not.
I mean, talking about, you've changed the name, you're deceiving us. Well, I'm not sure how we're deceiving it. We're telling you we're changing the name because it is a different. The second meeting had a much more healthy discussion, I felt like. But out of both of those, I think what came out of the opposition, I didn't take away that people were upset with the footprint or with what it looked like. The things that came out, Tim, to your point, were traffic.
Right, that's a big one.
Traffic, which a big one. Which Forest Drive and Spa Road, I'm not going to get into. I don't live there because I know when people live there, they have a much more. It's not a great road now. No.
Well, the issue, and so to give you some context, so we talked to the developer of the building in Eastport, and I don't know how familiar you are.
I'll tell you what.
Eastport.
Before we get back into the whole traffic thing, let's take a quick break, real quick.
Okay, yeah, just interrupt me quick, yeah.
And we'll come back. We'll talk about the traffic. We'll talk about the main issues about the environment, schools, which is sort of a red herring in traffic. See how you're going to address that, and talk about how we can find out more information on the project, both from the project point of view as well as for somebody that wants to live there.
Okay.
When it comes to diamonds, there are two things that matter: reputation and value. At Zachary's, you know our reputation. We pride ourselves on providing the best experience for every customer every day, because we wouldn't be here without you. But what you might not know is that Zachary's is the only diamond importer in Annapolis. We cut a check for $500,000 and deal directly with the De Beers site holder to bring you the best quality diamonds. That's just one step away from a mine. So by the time a diamond gets to your hands, only 2 people have touched it, not 6. I'm Steve Samaras, and at Zachary's, we've spent decades cultivating relationships around the world to ensure we can offer the best value on a diamond. But the relationships we value most are the ones we create with our customers right here in town.
Zachary's, online at zacharysjewelers.com. If it's a diamond, we're a good place to start.
All right, and we're back with Larry Bradshaw, who is the CEO of the National Lutheran Communities and Services. And before, I was so rudely interrupted by John, as I often am. So to give perspective, so we left off about traffic. So there were three problems with the original plan. And I have to keep emphasizing it's the original plan because I'm going to keep an open mind. And I actually, I don't have a problem with this one, to be honest with you.
Schools was a problem.
Schools was an issue.
And we've eliminated that.
Right.
I think so. I hope we've eliminated the school problem here.
Yeah. The environmental thing is something that I consider myself an environmentalist, but also I see that it's used as a Trojan horse whenever someone wants to fight development. That the first place they go to is we always said, the difference between a developer and an environmentalist is a developer wants a house on the water, an environmentalist already has a house on the water. So, and actually, literally in this case. But so I think the environmental stuff generally works itself out because the people who are so vocal when it comes to the environmental concerns, generally they get a lot of attention. And you adapt to that. The traffic is the last thing, and so it goes to a point that when is it really an issue, and when is it just a perceived issue? So when we talked to the developer Jeff Jacobson a couple weeks ago of the property in Eastport, so the first thing that we have a forum on Facebook that we follow pretty closely, and I'm looking at the marketing person here. It's like, yeah, I'm all over that.
Eastport Neighborhood
Forum, which is kind of where you get a temperature of what's happening in Annapolis. And when we were talking about the development in Eastport, what the opposition was going to was our traffic is hellacious, and it's not. It's just not. I drive that 6 times a day easily. John does. It's not. You don't wait to get through stoplights. You're not at a standstill if you're going to turn left. So my point was that it was being used as one of the reasons for people to oppose. When it comes to Forest Drive, the traffic studies say that it is a D, which means that any further development is going to cause its collapse. And whenever there's about once every month or 6 weeks...
Well, it could push it into a failure.
There is an incident that shuts it down. But John's kind of convinced me because I used to say the traffic's hellacious. He's right. It's not hellacious on Forest Drive when it's working properly. When there's a problem, then it is a complete and total shutdown. So my concern with the original plan was the traffic. And it wasn't from the retirement community because, for obvious reasons, they're probably not going to drive as much. There's not much traffic from that anyway. And actually, I was looking forward to the Harris Teeter. I'm not going to lie.
Well, they're also not going to be driving during the times when the traffic is
Yeah, but you're making suppositions. But I'm saying, to my point, we talked to, we spoke to Mayor Panelides, and he put himself into a tough position when he said, I am going to face this down. They're not going to develop. And I don't think he probably expected to win at that point, and it kind of painted him to a corner. But we even gave him the out during his interview and said, this is a different project. And I'm not cheerleading the project. We got accused of cheerleading the Eastport project. Well, John did. He got accused of being on the take. And he might be, and just not sharing. But this, to me, looking at it, and I am concerned about traffic in general. So you could be putting a tent there with 2 people, and I'm just kind of like, I don't know. Those people might have a trailer to carry their tent. So, but it looks like the schools and the environment has been resolved. Now, I don't know if the environment's been resolved to the satisfaction of the people who say we don't want any development whatsoever.
And there is that group of people that says no tree. You've got no kid left behind. You've got no tree hits the ground. And I think that was evidence in the letter that I think Jerry Weingrad had sent to the Capitol, I believe, saying that the only thing that we are going to accept is that there will be no disruption of the trees, and that's just really impossible, to be honest with you. Where do we stand with this? I mean, how do you address that with the environmentalists? I mean, what do you feel that you can do to appease them?
I'm not sure. First of all, and I've said this in public, anybody who's a proponent of the environment, you have to applaud them. I mean, I'm married to a person who at one point was, I think, part of the Chesapeake Bay Teacher of the Year, or I don't know if she was teacher, but she was in the running for it.
Congratulations, Mrs. Bradshaw.
So I am married to an environment, but it's also about balance. For individuals who don't want any trees to be felled or cut down, I have no answer for them. I mean, I can't ever make them happy. So I think it is about balance. And if you look at the site plan now versus where it was before, it's significantly smaller.
It's night and day.
We have gone on the record both publicly in my article or letter to the Capitol. I've said we plan on doing exactly what the Sierra Plan letter of 2013 said was we'll replace the trees at certain sizes at 2-to-1 and 3-to-1.
So there is a reforestation.
So there's a reforestation plan in place.
Do you know what you're missing? We're looking at two maps right here. The first one is the way it is today, and there's an aerial shot of the property, and it's all forested. And then there's the latest proposal, which has the latest proposal on it, which about a quarter of or maybe a third to a quarter of the plot is developed. What you really need is the previous development that was proposed, because going from this to this, going from the today to the latest proposal is kind of scary. But you go to the huge footprint to this, you're like, okay, that's a lot better. That's how they get toll increases on the Bay Bridge. They're like, we're going to increase it to $20, and everyone flips out like, all right, we'll only increase it to 12. And like, okay, then that's better.
Well, we do have that iteration. At one point, it was on our NLCS website. I'm not sure if it's still there or not, but it's certainly something we could provide you if you're interested and you want to put it up someplace.
Because I think most of the opposition you have right now, like I said, I think most people who live along Forest Drive are clueless to the specifics, and they don't care. They only want to know how it impacts them. I don't think there's any theoretical problems they have with it. It's going to be that environmental group, and can you ever appease them? And again, I'm with you. Is that I applaud the work they do, but it's not that fine of a line. I think it's a fairly bold line between being uncompromising and being a steward of the environment.
Yeah, I think being a steward of the environment is have responsible development, because the environment takes on a whole lot of things. I mean, it's not just trees, it's just water, it's the ecostructure that allows people to live and breathe and be in Annapolis. And part of that is even a fiscal structure or a business structure that allows people to not pay as many taxes, those type of things. So that is going to get probably messed up a little bit.
Well, that's I mean,
but to my point, I guess to my point is I think there's a balance to be struck. If you're an environmentalist and you are interested in compromise and those type of things, I think this project could be very appealing. If you are not interested in anything being cut down, it's not appealing.
Well, so it's interesting to me because there's some property about a mile and a half down the road towards the bay, which is the Samaras property. And it's about 5 acres. And on that property is an old liquor store, a bunch of derelict houses. I think there's a homeless camp. There's some squatters who are in one of the houses there. And that they've been looking to develop that for 12 years to mixed use and what have you. So I think what they are getting part of that where it's going to be mixed use, but they're also putting a Lidl there. That's a German store.
And there's also a senior living there going on.
Right. So what was interesting to me was that they quickly made a peace with the same environmental group that you were up against right now, and don't get me wrong, I hate that giant that's right there. I've been pretty vocal about that, so I was looking forward to the Harris Teeter, but I'm looking forward to the Lidl. But I'm your typical guy. Is how does this affect me? I hate the traffic. It's driving me nuts. Oh, wait a minute, there's a cool grocery store there. I'm in.
I just wonder whether the environmentalists and the opposition has more sway, or feel they have more sway with the city than the county, because that piece of property with Samaras is on the county. I believe.
No. It's not. It's half of it's in the county, half it's in the city. Yeah, and where they're going to develop. But I thought that was interesting that they quickly, because they work with Lidl and they're going to have some. They talk about the rain mediation, the water, the runoff remediation, and a couple rain gardens and some bike racks, and they were good, which seemed at odds with what you guys are doing, because we've been at a standstill for 6-7 years now. Right?
Yeah, it's been a long time. And if you go to the environmental features, this project, to your point about rainwater and other such things, it is going to have 100% stormwater retention on the site, not only through in one area, but throughout the site, through green roofs, through the drainage system throughout the whole site.
You reached an agreement relatively quickly with the South River Federation, and which put them at odds with the other environmental groups.
Correct.
And again, I got to emphasize, I'm not cheerleading the project, but I'm being reasonable for what was proposed before, which was shockingly large. What I'm looking at now is significantly smaller, and I believe that if it's going to happen anyway, that this might be the best iteration of it. But where do you stand with the project as it is now?
Well, right now we are in kind of the final stages of putting together the application for the Forest Conservation Plan and the special exception process, and ultimately the subdivision. We've had 2 public hearings, as I mentioned earlier, with the city, or not with the city, but with citizens. That wasn't a requirement from the city. That was something we offered just to.
Will there be more?
We will continue to disclose as the project moves along. Absolutely. And like I said, it comes down to traffic and whether real or perceived. And I know in some of those meetings I was sharing that we've had an traffic assessment done, predicting how many new trips this project will develop, especially at rush hour. And the numbers are, I think, 80 additional trips in the morning and 110 additional trips at night, which if you assume a 2-hour rush hour period, it's less than 1 minute a trip. So it's not substantial. However, our assessment also talked about traffic signalization and some other issues, maybe on Forest Drive where the interest of the project will be it's a right turn only versus being able to pull a left, or if there's signalization at the intersection of Spa Road and Forest Drive. I don't know the answer because the city is going to make that final decision. To your point earlier,
that's all in discussion there. That's
right,
as it goes through. And if they say that you want a traffic signal here, then there will be if you want to continue with the project, there will be a traffic signal there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's all to be determined. And there's a lot of people smarter than me that know how to deal with traffic. And I'm assuming that
they're not in Annapolis. I'll tell you that.
Well,
can you also promise that the seniors that are living here are not going to be cutting down telephone poles to block Forest Drive? Okay, so the only impact they have may be the times that they're driving on it.
Well, I think one thing that gets lost in the shuffle. I've been a proponent of seniors and older adults for the last 35 years of my career. We don't want to build something that is going to put anybody at peril coming in and out of this project either. So,
valid point.
I am not going to. I'm going to look to the city and say, I don't want my residents or our residents, having to go in a left turn lane onto Forest Drive without signalization there. I think that's just dangerous for them to try to do that. Maybe the signalization is farther. I don't know. Like I said, there are people a lot smarter than I, but that's going to be our interest is as we look at this with the city in a partnership, how do we help traffic on Forest Drive and Spa Road to the support of all those individuals, Tim, such as you, going there every day.
Sure.
But also balancing that with the safety of our residents. That's.
I think the solution there is on Spa Road. You have a 2-way entrance exit, force everybody out to the traffic signalization at Forest and Spa, and then on Forest Drive you have a one-way in from southbound, if you will, or inbound.
Like I said, a lot smarter people than me. Because
that's just logic that as you look at the map, and it keeps people at a signalized, controlled intersection there. I think the project is really well scaled down, and it's there now. You've got the main building. Do you also have little independent?
We have roughly 25 independent living units, which
are those cottages that I'm looking at? Right
cottages now? To the south of the.
No, I see. Oh, I got you. They're over here,
right there.
I thought they were in the woods there. I thought that's nice.
Now, are those like individual little homes, or are they townhome?
There's a combination. They're all single floor.
Okay.
Single story, so they would either be in a duplex kind of modular situation, or they would be single. Matter of fact, in this particular case, I think there are 19 singles and then 3 duplex units housing 6 units, or a total of 25. And what we have also told the city and the Environmental Commission is that number is actually down from about 33 units because of trying to be sensitive to where the trees lie, the specimen trees lie in that area. If there's a way to engineer...
What? You're sensitive to trees?
Absolutely. Yeah. But as the engineering goes for these projects, if there's a huge quality specimen tree sitting there and we can keep it and build around it,
why not?
We want to do that. I mean, we're not. You said the big bad developer earlier. I know that was, but we aren't the big bad developer. We're trying to meet a need for seniors, older adults who live in the Annapolis area, and also address the needs of the environment. I mean, we're buying 50 acres of land. It's not inexpensive land, and we're taking roughly 18 of those acres and saying we're never going to build on them. So. It's not. Again, I think it's a balance. We're not looking to. We're not looking to go in and say we're buying 50, we're clearing 50, and we're out of here. We're trying to provide a balance. Also in the traffic, we don't think our project is going to add many trips. Seniors, older adults, they do drive. I think I was misquoted someplace saying senior old adults don't drive. No. They do drive, but they don't drive during rush hour for the most part.
Sure.
There's no reason for them to leave between 7 and 9 unless it's a medical appointment or some kind of emergency. You're going to have people driving, but they're going to be driving off hours.
Well, one of the things also on traffic in the original version of this is they were talking about having shuttle buses that would bring the residents downtown, or maybe out to the mall, or to the Annapolis Town Center, or to the Giant or the Lidl to get groceries or whatever it is. Is that also in the plan going forward with the Village of Providence Point?
Absolutely, that's part of our program. We do that now here in Rockville. We also do it in Virginia, but we will have buses that would take people to medical trips, shopping events, to community events that will take them to and throughout the city.
Okay.
And there's a lot of interesting things now being done with some of the ride-sharing programs, specifically Lyft, I think, is doing a lot of partnerships with senior living communities that basically the residents can...
These guys are smart.
The residents can basically utilize that, and if it's a billed trip, it could just be billed back to the community. And so I think there's some real partnership opportunities there that can consolidate rides in a lot of different ways.
What type of jobs are we talking about? How many people do we need to? How many people do we need to build this, and how many people do we need to run it?
Estimates as far as construction jobs are about 400 full-time equivalents, to the tune of about $50 million in salaries.
For 18 months?
Probably closer to 24.
Okay.
For about a 2-year period. And then ongoing, we expect to have about 200 employees.
Okay, and that's professional, that's janitorial,
it's
that's
professional,
management.
Clinical, management, landscaping.
We've got a couple cruise directors, I'm sure, that are taking care of.
A couple cruise directors. Again, we have a smaller healthcare footprint, so a lot of metrics would tell you, especially with the unit mix we're talking about, if you take about 1/2 of an FTE or a full-time equivalent for the number of people you have on the site, is pretty close to how many people you're going to have working there, and that's about 200.
Yeah, and presumably you're going to try to hire from local as best you can, obviously, depending on as much as, I mean, that tends to be a little bit of a market conditions that...
Well, as I said earlier, we're going to be partners with the city of Annapolis in this. So it's the city of Annapolis, their people, there's a lot of skills there in Annapolis. We're going to do our best to hire local because that just makes it better for everybody.
Well, there you go. The village of Providence Point, I think, it's moving along at a snail's pace. Again, you've got a project now that has been downsized considerably. We will obviously put the pictures in the show notes there as well. I do want to thank you, Larry, for having us into Rockville to be able to learn a little bit more about this, a little bit more in depth as to your history, where you are. You've got 3 other communities that you're actively running, managing. You're looking to become a neighbor in Annapolis as opposed to the Doze and Dash. I think I don't know whether I said that on air before. But if we want to find information on the plan itself, you've got a website that's that, or and also, where do we find somebody that wants to maybe live there, wants to investigate possibly retiring there?
Well, I tell you, we're in the process of relaunching our website.
Okay.
I think that's going to come up in May. We're relaunching the website, but for now, I think you can go to nationallutheran.org. And you can find all the information you want on there. Just go to the Village of Providence Point page on nationallutheran.org, and you can find information on that. And also, if you are interested in living there, you can find information there also.
That's great. And real quickly, what is the demographic of are you attracting singles, couples?
My guess is that we would attract individuals somewhere between 76 and 80 years old. Mm-hmm. I think you will see about, as we open this community, probably about half of the units will be double occupied. The cottages, there's 25 cottages. My guess is most of those will be couples. But overall, I think you can look at between 50 and 55% initially as at opening of couples. That will ultimately go down as the community ages to about 30% long term.
And then again, as far as financial capabilities, I mean, you're sort of across the board as far as, I mean, you don't necessarily need the Fortune 500 CEOs moving in there. I mean, there may be, but that's not the requirement to get into.
I think from a business model standpoint, I always like to try and match our price points with the local resale market. If you look at some of the data we're looking at as far as the 5 to 7 zip codes that are very close to this project over the last several years, the median price is somewhere around $450,000.
Okay.
Median being there's half of them are under $450,000,
sure.
Half of them are over, half of them are probably way over, half of them are slightly under. So we're really going to try to put one of our entrance fee plans, which will be a traditional plan, which will not have a guaranteed refund, but will have a burn-off refund as the individual or the couple lives there. And then higher price plans for a guaranteed 50% refund of your money and also for 90%. So it will be, but I'm pretty certain here that based upon what we've seen in Winchester and also in Rockville, most of the people will take the lowest entrance point.
Does the city require any MPUDs, which modified price unit?
MDUPs.
I get the
moderately priced dwelling units. I need to get that out.
Does that come into play here in a senior community? Do you know?
It does not.
Okay.
It does not because of the senior living.
You're renting a room, if you will.
It's not an apartment. It's not a transfer of real estate. It's not a transfer of title. It's really a service agreement for a long-term service agreement. But it's going to be just a very exciting project. We really have a passion for it. We've been in it for 5 years. I've had a lot of people say, wouldn't it be better just to kind of bail out of this? But I'm a passion for serving seniors and really serving an underserved market. And this is an underserved market. There's great potential partners there between Anne Arundel Medical Center and other partners in the community. So, again, to your Doze and Dash, I just want to emphasize we're there for the long run. We're going to be there and going to be a partner and a neighbor for a long time.
All right. Well, thanks for having us out today and getting me back to Montgomery County, and then now we're going back to.
Well, hope you'll get back to Anne Arundel County later today.
Yeah, I know.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Great. So if you want to find us on Facebook, you can find us. We have a page, and we have a group on Facebook. On Twitter, you can find us at MD Krabs Podcast. I'm at Tim Hamilton 47. John's at Annapolis. You can send us an email at info@themarylandcrabs.com. Our website is themarylandcrabs.com. You can subscribe to us on iTunes and Google Play and iHeartRadio and Stitcher and a zillion other places, and we're going to be in a couple other places coming up. I think we're going to be on Facebook as well as YouTube, and that's a lot. I had nothing to do with any of that.
Tim, John, thank you.
This has been the Maryland Krabs Podcast with Tim Hamilton and John Fernay. Sure to follow them at all the regular places, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and online at themarylandcrabs.com. Take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Now, get the hell out of my kitchen. Seriously, go!
You're still here? It's over. Go home.